Hey, what's up, guys? It's Bakes here, and thank you for joining me for this throwback episode of ranking my favourite albums from a certain year. If you've been keeping up with this series on my channel, we've been slowly working back through the years, and in today's episode, I'll be ranking my favourite albums from the year 2018. Today's list is going to be super stacked and super exciting. If you guys have watched my music content on my channel before, you probably would have heard me speak about how much I love the year 2018 when it comes to music and all the bands and artists I was listening to. Just so many great albums and releases from that year. I think I've actually even said that it's my favourite modern year of music. I think the only other year just off the top of my head that really comes close was probably 2023. But quite often when I'm doing these ranking videos, I'll be like, 2025 for example was a really stacked year, but not quite on the 2018 level. Like, that's just how good of a year 2018 was in my eyes. So over the past few months and weeks and whatever, I've been going back and checking out some albums from 2018, preparing for this list. A quick overview of the year, I guess. Before I started, revisiting a handful of these albums, some of them I still listen to very frequently. But before I started, going back and refamiliarizing myself with a few of them, I was actually starting to think, okay, am I just getting ahead of myself? Is the year actually that good? Or is it more of a case of quantity over quality? Because not only is it a very strong year, there are a lot of albums and efforts and projects that I really enjoy from 2018. So I was like, is it just a numbers game where there's just so many albums that I do like that it just outweighs other years? But no, the year is both quantity and quality. Just really good albums that, like I said, I still listen to on very high rotation to this day, and especially towards the top of my list, getting into like my top 10 and even further back, just really strong albums. But with that being said, quality and quantity, normally when I'm doing these ranking my favorite albums from a certain year video, I don't put a limit on how many albums I include in the list. And that's purely because I've explained this before. Sometimes when I'm talking about a year in albums, there aren't actually that many albums. It rarely happens, but sometimes there's only a handful of albums, 5, 6, that I want to talk about from that year. So there's no point of making it a top 10 because I don't want to include albums that I don't really care about. And then sometimes there's 11 or 12 where it just goes over a top 10, so I'm like, I might as well include them. So I normally don't put a limit on how many albums I include in these ranking videos. But like I said, 2018 was stacked. It was quality and quantity. So there was so many albums and projects that I could pick from, and it just got to a point where I'm like, I think it might actually be too many. So in today's video, I've decided to limit it to 25. So technically it is a top 25 favorite albums from the year 2018. The reason I picked 25 is because I don't think I've ever done a year ranking albums that the number's gone higher than 25. Normally, just by coincidence, it's floating around the early 20s. So I thought 25 is a good number. It's a nice round figure. Well, not round figure, but 25, it's a nice number to stop it at. And then, the ones that go past 25, obviously, they're towards the back. They're albums I obviously like because I want to talk about, but I feel like the ones further back, that's where I'll draw the line. So I've done a lot of rambling. This is a long intro and it's going to be a long video because we have 25 albums to go through, and I'm sure you guys have got the gist how much I enjoy the year 2018 in music. So let's get into this list, ranking my favorite albums from the year 2018.
This shit don't make sense. Where do my dollars go? You see, lately I ain't been convinced. I guess they say my dollars supposed to build roads and schools, but my niggas barely graduate. They ain't got the...
Alright, so kicking off my top 25 with an album that might surprise a lot of people, considering it's a genre of music that I don't really feature much here on my channel, but here I have the album KOD by J. Cole. Admittedly, I understand that a lot of people actually kind of don't really care for this album, and even from J. Cole standards, it's not like it's in the better half of his discography if you ask a lot of people. But I do kind of have a soft spot for this album, especially because of the timing of its release and the nostalgia and everything that comes along with that. As you guys know, I'm not a massive rap fan. I'm not too knowledgeable on the genre or anything like that. But a lot of my friends and peers in school were rap fans. So this album was always kind of floating around, and I'd always hear it in passing, and that's what I mean by sort of a case of nostalgia with this one a lot. I really respect the storytelling and the concept for this album, and honestly, like I said, it's not overall one of J. Cole's best when you look at his discography as a whole. But there's moments off this album I really like a track like Photograph. I know this isn't an unpopular opinion, but it's like one of my top 5 favourite J. Cole songs. Like, I really like that track, and there's other moments that really do shine off this album. So, like I said, for someone who's not massive on rap or hip-hop, and, my taste in that sort of field isn't too in-depth or anything, I always say you just like what you like. It just so happens to be other genres I more so gravitate to, but I've always sort of had a soft spot for this album. I like it. Especially enough to make my top 25. So coming in at number 5 is KOD by J. Cole.
No matter where you've been, you jump into the water and you'll come out clean. It don't matter where.
Vance Joy's sophomore album, Nation of Two, comes in at my number 24 spot. I'm not massive on the solo acoustic artist genre of music, but Australia's very own Vance Joy has always had something about him that's drawn me in enough to at least check out what he's doing, majority of the time at least. But his first album in my eyes, Dream Your Life Away was the name of that album, I think is very underrated and is a genuinely solid album. But kind of easy to make a case for, especially those who are familiar with a handful of songs off that album. You had Riptide, Mess Is Mine, Fire in the Flood, all songs that sort of broke into people's ears, even if you listened to other genres and weren't too familiar with Vance Joy. But that was his first album. This is the follow-up, and I feel like from this album's release and onwards, Vance Joy kind of got forgotten about. And though I will say this is weaker than his first album, and the follow-ups after this one I haven't really cared much to go and check out, if I'm being honest, but this one is still decent enough. Again, you probably would know a handful of songs off this album. Saturday Sun, Lay It On Me, We're Going Home, just to name a handful. But even those don't quite hit the highs of the heights of his first album. But there's moments here that shine, even through the back catalogue, which I find to be kind of underrated for this album. A lot of the songs towards the back actually hold up over time pretty good. Like I said, it's not his best, and to be honest, this album is more of a mood album for myself. I need to be feeling in a particular way to sit through it or seek it out. But again, if you're willing to sit through it, definitely give it a chance, because a lot of people will gravitate to his first album when this one is still pretty good. So my number 24 is Nation of Two by Vance Joy. Coming in at my number 23, I have the album St. Leonard's by the band Slowly Slowly. I've voiced many times on my channel that Slowly Slowly are a band that have just really shot up for me over the past handful of years. I'd roughly say past 3-4 years they've definitely been higher on my rotation, and whenever they release new music I'm always super keen to check it out, and it's always high on my radar. But honestly, this album, even back in 2018 to this point now, it's an album that hasn't fully grabbed me. Which I still know people where personally this is their favourite album by the band still. I'd probably say my favourite album from Slowly Slowly is Daisy Chain. Even their new album from this year is also really good, but I'd say overall Daisy Chain's my favourite album from them. But for this album, I just feel like there's too much slower stuff of theirs, and stuff that feels overly simplified to the point where I feel like the band's talents feel almost underutilized when you compare it to what they can do. And of course there are highlights off this album, and funny enough, the highlights off this album are songs that I do feel are unique to the album, and songs that feel like songs that you see on later projects and were blueprints for things to come. Songs like Cold War and Alchemy and Smile Lines, they're some of my favorites, and a few examples that really make me go, wow, this band had signs of being what they are now early on. Now, with that being said, it does feel lesser, like I said, but this album's still good, and there's a lot to be impressed by. The writing, the melodies, and just overall the band's efforts as a collective. When a song is really working, it's phenomenal. Now, with that being said, I've been trying to get into this album a little bit more. If you've seen my collection updates and everything like that, I've only just recently got my hands on a physical copy of this album, and I've spoken about this on my channel before. I always listen to albums more when I actually have them in my collection, so I've been listening to this album a little bit more since picking it up, and so you never really know, it could grow on me more over time, but for now, it's going to be at my number 23. Coming in at my number 22, I have the album 21st Century Liability by Yungblud. The last time I mentioned Yungblud on my channel, I think I said something about how he's an artist in particular who hasn't really stuck the landing for my music taste in the long run. I've kind of drifted away from his music and his sound, and once upon a time his music was my shit, like massively. I was all over his songs and constantly had him on rotation, but over the past handful of years I've found myself honestly more often than not skipping some songs that come on in playlists or whenever I have music on shuffle or something like that. But like all good things, sometimes some time apart is all you need, because I literally can't remember the last time I listened to this album in full before revisiting it for this list. But coming back to do that exact thing and listen to this album in full, I enjoyed this revisit much more than I ever thought I would. Now, I will admit, it's not like I've had a complete change of heart. There's still some stuff here that hasn't aged very well, and there's some stuff that is kind of cringe, and it's not like even now I'm going to fly back to this one and just have it straight back on rotation like I did back in the day. But there's some stuff that I like here, some fun, catchy shit. Some genuinely solid material, which I hate to say I kind of brushed off for a while, I guess. But also, like I was mentioning, this is an album that once upon a time I had on very high rotation, so it sort of hit a patch of nostalgia for me and sort of hit this memory that was in the core of my brain where I was like, yeah, I remember when I was like really into this, and I think I just enjoyed that on a small scale. So coming in at my number 22, I have 21st Century Liability by Yungblud. The album Love Monster by Amy Shark comes in at my number 21 spot. I recently brought up Amy Shark's newest album in the video where I was ranking my favourite albums from 2024, and in that video I briefly brought up this one and sort of spoke about how over time this is an album that's kind of dropped off for myself, and I'm not saying that I've changed my mind on that because I still stand by that. It has dropped off over time, but revisiting it for this list, there were glimpses to why once upon a time I did like this album so much, especially for a subgenre, again, I'm not fully immersed into, the singer-songwriter, solo acoustic guitarist, but Amy Shark's got a little bit more of a pop influence into her sound. There's still shit here that I do like. The biggest problems that stand out to me with this album is the writing is a little bit like teen fangirl kind of cringy sort of stuff. It's almost like fan fiction written in a diary but then turned into a song. Some of the writing there just literally gives me the ick. And one thing that stood out listening to the album this time in particular is how long the album felt. At points it was just feeling like it was kind of dragging, so even when it got to songs that I enjoy towards the back of the album, like songs I really do like when I'm just listening to them on their own, I just sort of felt burnt out by then, and the album's actually not that long either, so like I said, there's just points where it does feel like it's dragging and a bit long in the tooth, and again you can put that down to some of the writing and subject matter and the repeated structure of a lot of the songs, and especially again in a subgenre of music that I'm not fully drawn into. But I'm speaking a lot of negatives. Obviously I do like this album, it's my number 21, and like I said, revisiting it again wasn't as bad as what I thought it was going to be. I honestly thought this could have potentially dropped out of my 25, but there's a lot of good stuff here. Like I still feel like Adore is one of her all-time best songs. You got Psycho featuring Mark Hoppus of Blink-182, Mess Her Up, there's still good stuff here. So my number 21 goes to Love Monster by the artist Amy Shark. Coming in at my number 20, I have the album Blend In by Hockey Dad. For those who don't know, Hockey Dad are this two-piece indie rock band from Australia with this sort of beachy surf-like vibe. Very 2010s Triple J. Hopefully my Australian viewers will get what I'm saying there. And even though I'm very iffy on this subgenre of music overall, Hockey Dad have been a fair exception since I've got into listening to them. And I haven't liked every single one of their projects, if I'm being frank, but this was sort of the first album of theirs that I really enjoyed from front to back and genuinely got something out of. I would even say that Once Upon a Time it was my favourite of theirs, if it wasn't for their newest album that came out last year, Rebuild Repeat, which I thought was great. But there's some really good stuff here. You know, you have tracks like Homely Feeling, I Want to Be Everybody, Danny, Join the Club is another really good one. And I'd probably say kind of after Join the Club, that's where the rest of the album and the back catalogue does get a little bit shaky, if I'm being honest. But there are moments there that are still fine, but overall I see this album as mostly a mood piece for myself, you know, to sort of fit a vibe and a mood that I'm feeling. I'll chuck this one on. And as I said, it's a subgenre that I'm not fully in love with, and you'll find that to be the situation when I talk about music subgenres that I'm not fully into. I need to be in a certain mood to be willing to sit through it from front to back and all in one sitting and something like that. So in ways it sort of deserves credit for at least being that, you know, an album that I can tolerate from a subgenre that I don't fully gravitate to, but still a lot of enjoyable stuff off this album, and Hockey Dad are a band that I definitely would recommend for those who do like that style of music. So coming in at my number 20 is Blend In by Hockey Dad. For my number 19 spot, I have the album Crown Shyness by the band Trashboat. I've actually spoken about this album a fair bit recently on my channel when speaking about Trashboat's other albums and everything like that. For a long time, this was actually my favourite album by the band, until I started getting back into them in a major way, and especially after listening to a lot of their newer stuff. But this was sort of a trip back revisiting this album because it had been a little while since I last listened to it in full. And there's a few things that I sort of came to realise with this album after sort of being away from it for a while. Firstly, this album isn't as different to their newer stuff as I remember it being. From my memory, I remember this being a lot more traditional pop punk. Yes, probably heavier than other traditional pop punk bands and everything like that. But this album does get very heavy. Like, I'd probably say a lot harder than I remembered it being, if I'm being honest. But also, on the flip of that, it's also maybe not as strong as I remembered it being. It's still really solid. I really like this album. It's probably on the better half of their discography, in my opinion. But it's not quite how it once was for me, which is fine. You know, opinions and shit change over time, all the time. But it's still a really good album. Like, you know, I've been really sinking my teeth into this one lately after revisiting it for this list. I think it's just sort of a case of being away for it for a while and just kind of having to adjust my outlook on it. But it's still a really solid album. Still an album that I love listening to and chucking on rotation, and one that I love recommending to people. Trashboat's definitely been a band recently that I've been sort of forcing onto people, you know, check out Trashboat, they're really good. So my number 19 goes to Crown Shyness by the band Trashboat. So my number 18 is actually the only album on this list I don't own a physical copy of, but here I have the album Composure by the band Real Friends. Even though this album is obviously from 2018, this is actually a newer one to my rotation and a newer album to myself. Real Friends is one of those melodic pop punk bands that I was kind of late to the game with, you know, put them alongside bands like Knuckle Puck or In Our Own Words, where they have similar taste and style, but took me a little while to get around to them. Like, I was familiar with Real Friends and those other bands, I just never really sunk my teeth into them before, but this was my first and sort of only taste of Real Friends, if I'm being honest. I haven't really checked out much of their other stuff. So this is sort of the only album by them I've really locked into also. But it's very catchy, melodic, pop punk, like I said. I'm still kind of new to them, like I've said a couple of times, so this could easily adjust on my list, either higher or lower. I guess only time will tell there. But I think what immediately stands out with this band as someone who's only just peeked through the curtain with these guys is a very unique vocal sound or style. I need an American viewer who's watching this video who knows the band and knows what the vocalist sounds like. Is it a regional accent or is it just how he sings? I need someone to answer that because it is very distinct, and I know it seems like a very small thing for an album as a whole, but like I said, you've got to keep in mind I'm sort of new to this album and new to this band. So small things like that can give a band a little bit of this distinct spark that makes you think back on the album and go, yeah, that's something I remember from it. I've actually heard they have a new lead singer, and they've been rocking with this new lead vocalist for the past couple of albums or so, which is interesting because a lot of bands, when the lead singer leaves, I know it's not all about the lead singer a lot of the time, but a lot of the time when the lead singer leaves, they just decide to rebrand and go with something different, but they've pulled in a new vocalist, and I've actually heard that, he's doing a good job as well. I'm pretty sure they also did an album from last year, which it's not a case of, like I said, I didn't know of this band. I knew of Real Friends and everything. I just didn't know they did an album last year. So I should check it out. I've heard it's actually pretty good. But with that being said, I'll just leave it there because I'm doing a lot of off-topic rambling on this one. But my number 18 goes to Composure by the band Real Friends.
When she coming from my heart, it feels like Armageddon. I'ma turn the tables, promise you will not forget it. Won't apologize, don't give a fuck if you're offended. No discussion, yeah, we got...
Coming in at my number 17, I have the album Beer Bongs and Bentleys by Post Malone. From what little personal research I've done before preparing this list, this seems to be most people's pick for favourite Post Malone album, just from what I've heard. And over time, it's one that's personally yo-yoed with me. Like, when it first came out, I started out liking it. Over time, it sort of dropped for this period, and now it's at a point where I'd probably say it's my second favourite Post Malone album. Just off the top of my head, I'll say that. It's undoubtedly got some of Post Malone's, greatest of all-time hits. You got Rockstar, Psycho, Better Now, Candy Paint, just to name a few. But it's the rest where it's sort of teetered back and forth for me over time, and currently it's at a point as an overall effort I can be like, yeah, it's not that bad, it's pretty good actually. Not everything is banger, but majority of the catalogue is above or at least at this average level. But again, it's the tracks like Rockstar and Better Now, just to name a couple of them that I brought up before. These songs are incredible, top tier. These are songs that go up against the best of Post Malone's entire catalogue, and honestly, they could be the best songs that he's ever done. Really, really good bangers off this one, which really ups this album to a higher level in my opinion. So at my number 17, I have Beer Bongs and Bentleys by Post Malone. Coming in at my number 16 is the album Proper Dose by The Story So Far. At the time of this album's release, I was kind of on this subconscious break from The Story So Far, I guess. So it was actually a little while down the track where I actually got around to listening to this album and checking it out as a full effort. And it was sort of between this album and their previous stuff that was kind of the change of sound that most people associate with the band, which I guess technically is not wrong. There's a lot more slower, melodic stuff here, which is quite moody and rhythmic. But also, on the other hand, there's a handful of songs here that wouldn't feel out of place on any of the previous albums that came before either. So it's sort of this middle ground, which I don't find too jarring, to be honest. But I've said this before, honestly, any album by The Story So Far is pretty easy listening and is fairly enjoyable, and this is no exception to that. It's not an album that blows me away, but it's quick, it's easy, it's digestible, like I've said, and it's hot, and it really does hold its own in a very strong discography by this band. So coming in at my number 16 goes to Proper Dose by The Story So Far. The album Everything Is Temporary by the band Between You and Me comes in at my number 15. Before I get into this one, I'm going to miss Between You and Me. They've recently announced that the band has broken up, or on this extended hiatus, whatever the fuck they're calling it. But man, it sucks, because Between You and Me is one of my favourite modern or current pop punk bands, and yeah, it's going to suck not having new music from them ever, or whenever they get back together. I really don't know, but either way, I've always really liked this album, but over the past year or so, it's actually grown on me a fair bit. I've spoken about how much I love their follow-up album to this one, being Armageddon. I've said that plenty of times on my channel before, where that album feels a little bit more polished and crafted, and I might also add, highly underrated. Armageddon is such a good album. But to most of you, I've said this a few times before, I do like my pop punk to be a little bit more rough around the edges sometimes, and this album delivers a more traditional pop punk sound. I guess some people would call it generic pop punk. I know Neck Deep would. They sort of took the mantle of generic pop punk and took it in their stride, but this album's grown on me a lot, like I was saying. Yes, it doesn't deliver too much on variety, I guess, on the spectrum of variety, if you want to call it that. The craft isn't quite yet fully honed to what the band soon became capable of, but there's a lot to enjoy, and especially if you're a true pop punk kid at heart, this is going to be right up your alley. So my number 15 goes to Everything Is Temporary by the band Between You and Me. The album Disease by the band Beartooth comes in at my number 14, a throwback to one of my earliest random album reviews on YouTube, and this was honestly probably my first time revisiting this album in full since that review, which is just crazy to think about. And honestly, this album isn't as weak as what I once thought it was. It's more of a case of comparing it to the band's best and it not really coming close. When you look at it for what it is, this album's actually pretty solid. A lot of catchy songs, a mix of hard-hitting heavy stuff with some infectious choruses, but comparing it to the band's best, which in my opinion their best album is Disgusting, when you're comparing it to that album, it just feels like a letdown. So knowing what the potential of this album could have been makes it a little bit harder to get on board, but like I said, it's still not bad. It's almost a case of self-sabotage. Just Disgusting came out and it was so fucking good. This was a couple of albums later and it's so close to being there, but it's just not quite there. It's still that level down, but I don't want to take too much away from it, because taking it in for what it is, this album is still really solid, still really enjoyable. It is in the band's better half of their discography, in my opinion, easily. So coming in at my number 14 is the album Disease by the band Beartooth. Coming in at my number 13, I have the album Entertainment by the band Waterparks. This era of Waterparks as a band I love, but this was always the slight drop in quality between two masterpiece albums in my opinion, being Double Dare and Fandom. This is the album that fell between them, or at least that's what I thought was the case for the longest time. To clarify, I never thought this album was like bad or this abomination or anything like that, just weaker when comparing it to the other two, and as I said, it falls right in the middle, so it sort of stood out like a sore thumb, I guess. And technically now that hasn't changed, I guess, because I still think this is where the album falters, when you compare it to the other two albums, which are so great in comparison. But this album just isn't as bad at all, and the more and more I've given it a chance as time's gone on, especially over, the last few re-listens, even before coming back to re-listen to this album for preparing for this list, it's grown on me. I've always loved tracks like 1111 and Blonde and Not Warriors, but it's songs like Rare and Sleep Alone, which for the longest time I kind of slept on, purely for the fact that I was always revisiting the other two albums more than this one, and just for not giving this album attention, I was missing out on those tracks that were sitting towards the back, which, I didn't really give a second thought to, I guess. So yes, technically still weaker than their top tier, but this album is much better than sort of what I gave it credit for the longest time, which I feel kind of shit about, because as I said, this era of Waterparks I always really liked, and like I said, I never thought this album was bad, but it is much better than I gave it credit for. So my number 13 goes to Entertainment by the band Waterparks. Coming in at my number 12 is the album Welcome to the Neighborhood by Boston Manor. I've said this many times, but Boston Manor is a band that I really do enjoy. However, there's a handful of albums that kind of feel underwhelming in a way, because majority of what the band do as a total is good, but the albums as an effort, just don't quite hit the mark. But this album is definitely one of their better ones, if not their best. You could make a case for that, definitely. Heavy, gloomy, mellow, dark, energetic, even ranging to some sexy sounding shit as well. And from my understanding, this was sort of Boston Manor's first real go at this kind of sound with a full-length album. And there are songs here that are well known for the band's discography. You have a track like Halo, which is a great fucking song as well. It definitely deserves all the notice that it gets. But this is also a really good album with a lot of the band's hidden gems as well. You have Flowers in Your Dustbin, Tunnel Vision, If I Can't Have It, Stick Up. Oh, Stick Up is such an underrated song. Check that one out. It's so fucking good. But like I said, this is an album that sort of sold me on Boston Manor as well. It was the first one that really got me into them. And even though, like I said, I can be iffy with Boston Manor's albums as a full effort, this one is solid. And like I said, you definitely could make a case and convince me that it is their best album. For me, it's between this one and Sundiver, which came out last year. So yeah, one of their earlier albums and one of their newer ones. But coming in at my number 12, I have Welcome to the Neighborhood by Boston Manor. So as we move on to my number 11, I feel like this is sort of the point where the albums start to go up that notch and up another level. But at my number 11, I have Skinny Dipping by Stand Atlantic. Even though the band has changed their sound with pretty good success over the back half of their careers, I'd still love to hear them drop an album back with their OG sound, like what they had off this album. Even if it was just a little treat, like a bit of fan service, I just would love to see how it would be translated, and I guess also how it would be received. I feel like fans who were into them, back at this time would appreciate it a lot. I'm not sure how newer fans would take it, because as I said, their sound has changed pretty dramatically over time, but it would be interesting. To quickly clarify, I like both their old sound and newer sound off later projects, but this album and this sound still packs a whole heap of fun and packs a punch as well. It's more traditional kind of melodic pop punk, simple, sort of approach, but still enough to sprinkle earworms throughout the track list and, have fun moments. However, even though there are a lot of really fun tracks throughout, it still has this quality where the sounds sort of bleed together and start to feel this kind of flow where it gets to this halfway mark and you sort of just become numb to it, if you will. That's not me saying, each song is a carbon copy of the last, but tone-wise, I'm not sure if there's enough variety to keep you fully locked in. I feel like it does pick up pace towards the two closing tracks being Clay and Roses, but sort of that middle patch, as I said, you sort of just get numb to it at a point, and it's just But as I said, still a great album, still lots of fun, easy listening, and like I said, comparing their earlier stuff to their newer stuff, it's fun to look back at once was, what they would throw out, and, this was what we knew them as, and now it's a totally different sound, but I feel like both work. So like I said, I'd love to see one day just them drop this surprise album that sounds like their older shit. I'd just love to see the reception and like to see what they do with it. So coming in at my number 11, I have Skinny Dipping by the band Stand Atlantic. So as we move into my top 10 of my top 25 of 2018, here I have the album Burning Alive by the band Crazy 88s. I often bring up this album because it's super underrated by a band that probably not a lot of people know, and who are made up of these musicians who I feel like unfairly get sort of classed as YouTube personalities. This album is fucking really good, heavy and hard hitting with breaks of melodic moments and amazing hooks. The way this album and the songs are written, it does a great job at painting the stories visually in your head and bringing them to life with energy and passion, which makes it really annoying when they're often viewed as a project done by YouTubers who happen to be talented musicians. It's kind of like, no, take it for what it is. This album is genuinely good. A lot of people also say this album feels too mid-2000s. Who gives a fuck? Like, there's plenty of good albums from the mid-2000s. Like, if you don't like it, fuck off. This album's good. One thing that I've often forgotten to mention when I talk about this album, and I've talked about it plenty of times, is how well it flows and the transitions between the songs. They're so seamless and it's just done so good. I'm so keen for new music from this band, and I never thought I'd say that. Not because I didn't want to say it, I just never thought it would happen. Like, this is their one and only album, and it came back out in 2018, so that's 7 years ago, and it's just like, well, I guess we're never getting another album. Nuh-uh. They've just announced that a new album is coming out at the end of 2025. I'm super keen. Like, if I'm their only fan, fuck it. Like, I'm the only fan that's waiting for this new album to come out. So I'm super excited. Crazy 88s with their album Burning Alive coming in at my number 10. Coming in at my number 9, I have the album Blue in the Dark by the band Bearings. This is a weird one because it's not actually doing anything remarkable, and that sounds insulting, but it's a track list that is like constant, consistent, and the songs are done so simple yet like done so well. And when I say that, I don't mean that as an insult, like I was saying. I've been one to say that sometimes keeping it simple is better, and also I feel like sometimes simple is like underratedly hard to pull off, and I guess not a lot of people are gonna know what I mean by that, but just listen to this album. It's done so simple, but it just seems so easily done. Like, Bearings just makes it look easy, with plenty of songs that feel carefree and just breeze by. But at the forefront, they are a pop punk band, so when they want to pack energy and grit their teeth, there are plenty of examples of that off this album as well. Tracks like Where You Are and Goodbye, just to name a couple. And honestly, maybe not as high as it once would have ranked on this list, you know, if I did it a couple years back or even back in 2018. But what stayed most true with this album is it's consistently good. It flies by. It's just good, simple listening. Great debut album. Like I said, just the consistency of songs from front to back off a debut by a band that this is their first time putting together a full length. It's really impressive. So my number 9 goes to Blue in the Dark by the band Bearings. The Amity Affliction come in at my number 8 spot with their experimental album Misery. Like I said, definitely the most experimental album of Amity's discography, and to be honest, not quite as good as their traditional sound that they're known for, but still not bad at all. Not close to their worst album, that's definitely for sure. And even though this experiment to try new sound and dabble with like electronic influence and whatever, it didn't quite stick the landing, but it's an effort that I honestly really appreciate, you know. It's something different. It's not a faceplant of a failure. It's not like they've completely demolished their careers with this album. It's a glance at variety in their catalogue, you know. If you listen to Amity Affliction and you're listening to the same albums over and over and over, it's a nice change of taste that you can chuck on your palette there. And there's plenty of good stuff here, you know, at whatever angle you look at it from. You know, there's still some really fucking good songs here. And it's not a go-to Amity album, like I mentioned, but I've enjoyed this one over time periodically. You know, there's a cycle of time that goes by and I go, yeah, I'm really happy to listen to Misery from front to back. And like I said, even though it's not a go-to album, it's not in their top three, or it probably is in their better half, I guess, or maybe right in the middle. But it just goes to show how much I love this band, because even an album that's experimental and it's not my go-to, it's not quite my thing, it's something different and it's something that I don't mind checking out every now and then. And honestly, I think gets a little bit too much hate, this album. So coming in at my number 8 is Misery by the Amity Affliction. Coming in at my number 7, I have the album Youngblood by the band 5 Seconds of Summer. This was kind of a hard one to rank on this list. I was sort of struggling on where to put it. This is the returning album from the band when they went on this break, and this was the first effort at this new matured sound that they were going for, which on hindsight was definitely the way to go. But they were still working out the kinks in a way and finding their feet from coming off this sound that was this poppy, pop-punk, radio-friendly shit to still radio-friendly stuff, but more like pop-rock, matured influence. I'm sure you're getting the gist of what I'm saying. And yes, there are moments that do feel dated, I guess, maybe, but also a lot of charm and genuinely good moments. You've got Youngblood as the song, not the album. The song is genuinely fucking great. Want You Back, they're two of the better known examples off this album that I think, you know, a lot of people know are good, but there are examples that go deeper that show a lot of variety. You know, you've got songs like Valentine, which is dark, gloomy, yet sort of sexy feeling. You've got Talk Fast, which feels like it's straight from the 80s, plenty of influence from bands like The Police, for example. And then you've got whatever the fuck Meet You There is, like, I don't know how to fucking categorize that, but it's a cool song. And that's just to name a few. I mean, you can look back at this drastic change or style and see it as dated or cringe or whatever, but I like it. It's fun, and I've said this plenty of times before, I have a soft spot for 5 Seconds of Summer, and I know that's maybe an easy cop-out saying, I have a soft spot and it's nostalgia, but I think this album is genuinely good. So coming in at my number 7 is Youngblood by 5 Seconds of Summer. Coming in at my number 6 spot, I have the album Taboo by Denzel Curry. To sound like a broken record, hip-hop and rap, or whatever you want to call the genre, is a genre of music that I don't gravitate to or have much knowledge on. But again, I've said this before, this is literally one of my all-time favorite hip-hop or rap albums, like, ever. Denzel Curry overall has this unique, gritty style, and this album is like the perfect example of what I mean. Plenty of what feels like this old school grit, while also feeling like not dated by having like modern beats and flows and things like that. I love when rap has clear lyrics as well and understandings. Like, I'm not huge on mumble rap or anything like that, but all the messages and meanings of the songs here get across fine, and as I said, his flow and writing is just really fucking solid. All the features on this album also hit. There are no songs that I'd describe as like bad. Like any album, there's obviously songs you like more than others, but like from start to finish, it's just banger after banger. Like, this album is so good. But this rap album has always had me coming back, and I can only say that for a handful, honestly. Like I was saying earlier in this video, for example, you know, subgenres that I don't normally gravitate to, I have to be in a certain mood. It's not the case for this one. I can literally listen to Taboo whenever, and I love it every single time. So coming in at my number 6, like, I'm almost regretting not having it higher now. I have Taboo by Denzel Curry. So breaking into my top 5, here I have Love and Loathing by the band With Confidence. Every time this album drifts from my brain, or honestly whenever I kind of undermine it, when I come back to revisit the album, it just blows me away by how much I like it, and I should just always keep in mind how good this album is. To me, this is the best With Confidence album from their discography, where they found a good middle ground between their straight pop punk days and their later change to sort of pop rock. This was a good middle ground that finds the right balance between both. Unfortunately, late news to me, I know, they have disbanded, but I think this was sort of their magic moment, 3 members, right sound, and to be honest, this album isn't like it's banger after banger, to be fair, because there are some songs here that honestly, like, I kind of don't care about, like only a couple, but when they fucking hit, they hit in a major way. Like, the bangers here are really good. Songs like Jaded, Icarus. Oh, Icarus is such an underrated song. Go and check it out. Closing track Tales is also really good. Songs like that and those little samples of like bangers just pick up the slack for the songs that I'm saying before maybe aren't the best or I don't really care for. As I said, there's not many that I don't care for, but there are a couple there. But this is an album that I've always found enjoyable every time I come back to listen to it. As I said, sometimes I'll happily wear it. I undermine it. I go, maybe it's not as good as some of the ones I have higher here for 2018. But no, it definitely holds its own. Coming in at number 5 is Love and Loathing by the band With Confidence. Coming in at my number 4, I have the album Identity Crisis by the band Waster. Waster is a band that I've given the title of most underrated to on my channel before. And honestly, this is the album that like really got me into them. Like, I liked them before this album, but this was the one that was like, yep, I fucking adore these guys. They're so good. Compared to their whole discography, this in my eyes is like their most polished album. I feel like every pop punk band goes through their polished era where the songs are a little bit more tighter, a little bit more groomed and thought out and whatever, a little less gritty, but that's fine. Like I said, all bands go through that polished era, and this album is just so fucking good. It's got catchy hooks, energetic rhythms, and tons of replay value. I feel like that's super important, especially with pop punk music, because it can feel like ear candy sometimes, and yeah, you can just get overstimulated, but if it has that replay value, it's got you hooked in, and I feel like it's everything I want from like a pop punk album, honestly. Like, most people, like I said earlier in this video, would call it generic pop punk, but I just feel like it hits the mark. I've always said that if you're a fan of Neck Deep, you're gonna love Waster, and in particular, this album is like the perfect example of that. There are moments off this album that sound identical to Neck Deep, and I don't mean that as in it's a case of copying or ripping off or whatever, but also there are like points where I feel like they do it better than Neck Deep, and I'm a massive Neck Deep fan. They're like a top 5 favorite band of me of all time, and like, you guys know how many bands I listen to, so top 5 is a really high mantle. But like, this album is just so fucking good. I've just lost my train of thought. But like this band, this album flies under the radar. It deserves so much more, especially for being a standout in a strong collective year. So coming in at my number 4 is Identity Crisis by the band Waster. I could talk all day, but as you said, my brain is scrambling, so I'm just going to leave it there. So getting into my top 3 for a stacked year, at my number 3 spot, I have the album The Great Depression by the band As It Is. I already knew that this album was going to be a top contender for the year, but honestly, it had been a couple of years since I last listened to this album in full. There are a lot of songs that I do come back to fairly often, but listening to it from start to finish, it had been a little while. And before saying what I'm going to say, I should also add, regardless of the praise that I give it, it has slightly dropped over time, so take that for what you will. But coming back to this album for the ranking, I was having flashbacks to why this album was so great, and is so great, I should say. As It Is has always been a band in which I think they've gone undeserving for a lot of the criticisms that they've gotten over time, and went long time without the flowers. And this is an example of an album where I think they did deserve a lot of praise and did deserve their flowers. I'm iffy when it comes to concept albums, because I feel like they can be very hit and miss, and sometimes I feel like something that is not consistent and it doesn't translate a message well sometimes gets the concept album label slapped on it just for the sake of marketing, or I don't know, trying to get other listeners on board. But to me, this is like a really good example of it, and I genuinely mean this. This could be one of, if not my favorite concept album of all time. And yes, I'm comparing it to some of the greats like The Black Parade by My Chemical Romance, and there's plenty out there. This could be my number one favorite concept album. The message never gets lost, telling the story of a literal Great Depression, a person struggling with demons, and each song being a step in the process. Like, if you look at the back here, it has 4 stages of depression. You've got Denial, which are the first 3 songs, Anger as stage 2, and it's the next 3. You've got stage 3, which is Bargaining, and stage 4, which is Acceptance. Like, the message and the translation of this concept album is just done so well and done so seamlessly. And still, not every track is a home run, and it does feel like at points it is kind of dragging, but then it just gets back on the rails so seamlessly and so well. I think this is an album that is so good as what it's trying to do, and I feel like As It Is, as a band in general, that's an underrated strength of theirs, because a lot of their albums cover an overall theme or message, even if it's not a concept album. And like I said, they've gone long overdue without their flowers, but my number 3 favourite album of 2018 is The Great Depression by As It Is.
I know how to levitate up off my feet, and ever since the 7th grade I learned to fire breathing. Though I feed on things that fell, you can learn to levitate with just a little help. Learn to levitate with just a little help.
Coming in at my number 2, I have the album Trench by 21 Pilots. This is the band that gave me my favourite album of 2024, being Clancy, and I even said in that video, even though Clancy was my favourite album of last year, there is one album that is stopping it from being my favourite 21 Pilots album, and this is it. This album really is peak, like 0 bad songs, flows beautifully from front to back, and has stayed consistently good, especially when you're comparing it to another 21 Pilots album that I once said was roughly as good as this one, being Blurryface. I feel like Blurryface over time hasn't stuck the landing, and some songs are feeling a little bit dated and out of place. It's not the case with this one. The writing, the production, the instrumentals, everything about this album just feels so like above itself, and it almost feels cinematic. And I guess speaking of cinematic, they have this story and I guess concept that they carry over their last handful of albums. I feel like this one translates the story the best as well. I feel like it's the best chapter in that story. This album just really is peak. Like, it's one of my all-time favourite albums, I guess you could say as well. So coming in as my number 2 is Trench by the band 21 Pilots.
Start to smile and wave to me. If that ain't home.
And my number 1, my favourite album of 2018, here I have The American Dream by Trophy Eyes. I'll try to keep this one brief as I can, because I've recently done a full-length review of this album, like I said, on the grand scale of things not too long ago. But this album is just so impactful to me, if nothing else. So many qualities of this album just work for me, and yes, there are some slight nitpicks when you get down to the nitty-gritty of this album. But overall, the timing of this album's release, the imprint it made on me is like nothing to take lightly. The writing, the tone of this album just makes it feel larger than life. Also very visual, like when you're listening to the songs, the meanings can just be painted in your head and you can just see every word, every lyric, and it's just done so well. I do listen to this album a lot, but funny enough, I probably don't come back to this album as much as like some previously mentioned ones like Identity Crisis by Waster or Trench by 21 Pilots. It's probably because, Waster's Identity Crisis is a bit more fun and loose and light-hearted with like some pop punk pace and everything, and you know, Trench has a bit more variety and change of styles and whatever. But when I listen to The American Dream by Trophy Eyes, in comparison, this album just leaves me with something new every time and just hits on like this deeper level. And yeah, this album is just so impactful to me through my life. I remember going to a merch signing or just signing in general, meeting Trophy Eyes, and this album came out the day after, and just so impactful. I got to show off one day my Trophy Eyes signed poster that I got that day. It's framed in my living room. I just adore that thing, and this album is, as I said, not one to take lightly. So my favourite album of 2018 is The American Dream by Trophy Eyes. Alright, so this video was probably already long enough, so I'm going to keep this outro and recap real brief. I'm just going to say quickly, thank you for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, I always appreciate it, guys, more than you know. But let's quickly do this recap so we can get the fuck out of here. So my number 25 was KOD by J. Cole. Number 24 was Nation of Two by Vance Joy. Number 23 was St. Leonard's by Slowly Slowly. Number 22 was 21st Century Liability by Youngblood. Number 21 was Love Monster by Amy Shark. Number 20 was Blend In by Hockey Dad. Number 19 was Crown Shyness by Trash Boat. Number 18 was Composure by Real Friends, the only album that I didn't have a physical copy for in this list. Number 17 was Beer Bongs and Bentleys, Post Malone. Number 16, Proper Dose, The Story So Far. Number 15, Everything Is Temporary by Between You and Me. This is actually my signed one as well. Pretty cool. Number 14, Disease by Beartooth. Number 13, Entertainment by Waterparks. 12, Welcome to the Neighborhood, Boston Manor. 11, Skinny Dipping by Stan Atlantic. My top 10 started off with Burning Alive by Crazy 88s. 9, Blue in the Dark by Bearings. 8, Went to Misery by The Amity Affliction. My number 7 was Youngblood by 5 Seconds of Summer. Number 6 was Taboo by Denzel Curry. Number 5 was Love and Loathing by With Confidence. My number 4, Identity Crisis by Waster. My top 3 started off with As It Is, The Great Depression. 2 was Trench by 21 Pilots. And my number 1, The American Dream by Trophy Eyes. Like I said, guys, if you made it this far, thank you so much. If you have any thoughts on any of these albums, or any of your favourite albums from 2018, let me know in the comments below. If you made it this far, let me know in the comments below, because you are a trooper. So I'd love to show you guys some love for that. And thank you for watching this video. Let's all get the fuck out of here, because we've done too much binging watching this video. So, see yous.